sound is like, has mass. It can be heavy, it can be light, it has texture, it can be rough, it can be smooth, it has viscosity, you can pull it apart like a fluid, right? It has velocity, it has acceleration, it has all these properties.
Welcome to the Siddhartha Show, where we've usually had only artists that are just underground singers. But today we have a different type of artist. We have a professor who studies music in our own environment. Can you describe yourself, and would you even call yourself an artist?
All right, well, thank you for having me on your show. And to start, that's a kind of challenging question and probably at the core of my work. I write music, I perform music. I'm on the composition faculty at the School of Music here at Arizona State University. So I'm very much involved in the creation and performance of music. I like to call myself, though, an experienced designer because I think there's a lot of things that are tied up with the ideas of composition and music more broadly mean that we get caught up in those kind of has to be this genre, has to be, can't have this, got to do this, whatever, rather than thinking about the fact that we're actually creating experiences for people. And then my tenure home is in a school called Arts, Media and Engineering. And so what that allows me to do is teach kind of more technical sides of music, like coding for music and so on.
What does
And
that
also
mean?
like writing stuff in Python or Java or actually creating your own software to
Oh, wow.
perform music. Doing live coding, for instance, which is a performance practice where you literally write the code on stage and create music on stage in code in real time. Um, and in that space, I think much more about music as sound and sound as music. And so I think about my work really being in sound. In that over there, I have like a 50 loudspeaker 3D sound environment where we can recreate fully three-dimensional sound experiences. And I also do a lot of work on developing systems to help the Phoenix Zoo, particularly with conservation efforts to protect jaguar and other animals in Costa Rica. So I kind of mix it all up.
Yeah, so a lot of your music work is in music, and you have a really technical side. There's this music theory, and your work sort of is very abstract using environments. Is music theory something prioritized here in your creative operation?
So, so often when I have new music composition students, I ask them to come in, when they've come in for a lesson and they're one-on-one lessons, and I ask them to put their hands out and to put in their kind of things that we think about in terms of music theory. So put in their harmony and feel how heavy that is in your music practice. Put in their counterpoint, the relationships between instruments, feel how heavy that is in there, right? And put in their harmony, counterpoint, and melody, and feel how heavy that is, like how much of your practice is in there, right? And for most people thinking about writing tonal music, whether that's pop music or symphony orchestra, what they're holding in their hands right now, especially if listeners are doing this with us right now, is really heavy, right? And then we walk outside my office and we throw that away. And then we come back and then I ask them, okay, what's left?
Wow,
Right?
so what is left for people?
Well, exactly. What is left? So, what is left? Sound, right? And we come back to thinking about the fact that actually, if we throw all that stuff away, if we get rid of all of that stuff, the fundamental material that we're working with is sound. And what we're really doing is we're just crafting, sculpting sound. So if we start thinking about making music in that way, then we have to think about, well, what's our language of talking about sound? Because we can't talk about parallel fifths or C minor seventh or D dominant 13th or whatever we want to talk about anymore. We've got to talk about sound directly, and then we have to think about, well, what sound is like has mass. It can be heavy, it can be light, it has texture, it can be rough, it can be smooth, it has viscosity, you can pull it apart like a fluid, right? It has velocity, it has acceleration, it has all these properties. And so now we can kind of get around being molded, if you like, by the kind of traditional approach to music theory, telling us we can't have parallel fifths and we mustn't have octaves and whatever else it wants to tell us. We can get around all that stuff and say, hey, we are sculptors, basically. We're working with sound and we're making experiences for people. And if we lose track of that, we no longer really make good music.
Wow. So it's about making experiences for people. Can you
Right.
describe, like, you talked about 3D sounds, how that's like a system that you made. What's that like? Are you recording in the field?
Yes, indeed. So we approach that from two very different directions. So one is um, my background here is Costa Rica. That's part of the forest that I work in Costa Rica. And for those on audio and not looking at the picture, I guess that's like a fairly thick, high altitude rainforest. So I make a lot of recordings there using microphones that have 9 microphone capsules on the single microphone, and they're all kind of pointing in slightly different directions. And so that records what's called a high order ambisonic signal, which is a three-dimensional sound field. And then we can decode that signal into the dome so that it sounds exactly like you're in that place in Costa Rica, right? And so we have quite a lot of recordings in Costa Rica and in Ecuador. And actually, only last week I had one of the people from Costa Rica that we work with was here, and we put her in the dome and played her sounds that are from the area that she's in, and she's just like, oh my God, this is so realistic, it's unbelievable. So we use it for those kinds of purposes, and then we have like what we call the wellness dome sessions every week, where students and anybody from the public can just come, pull up a cushion, chill out on the ground, listening to rainforest sounds, like as a kind of relaxation experience, right? And then we also use it as a three-dimensional space that you can compose music in. And so we've commissioned a number of composers to come and write works specifically for the dome. Eleni Lilius, for instance, Sarah Bella Reid, you might have heard
Yeah.
of, a bunch of people. And actually, Sarah made a really cool video that's online about working in that dome. So you can look that up if you want to check it out.
So in the environment, is there a rhythm that you see? Like when you record out there, like does your work involve understanding the rhythm the animals make, stuff like that?
So I'm not really listening to them in that way. If we go back to thinking about music theory and throwing all that stuff out, right? Thinking about rhythm is one of those things we might throw out, like, because it's the concept, right? That there are kind of periodic patterns within things. We've had some recording studies going on, working with members of the community who record for us in the same location, for instance, in Joshua Tree National Park every month. What we managed to do is we developed an algorithm that listens to those recordings and gives us an indication about what we call species density metric. So how many different streams of sound are present in that recording, right? So what we notice is that obviously between seasons that changes, but actually over longer periods of time, like in Joshua Tree over the last 10 years, that species density metric has been falling, which means that animals are either dying off there or they're leaving that area, right? So there's a number of ways that we can analyze those recordings to understand what's going on in the environment and how that's changing over time, and whether that's impacted by like climate impact or other factors that are going on in that environment. So we're tending to listen to it in those more for research purposes in those more technical ways and analyze it in those more technical ways. But I also think there's just like huge benefit you coming along and sitting in a rainforest and just listening to it for an hour, right? It's not only is it relaxing, it reminds you how incredibly rich it is and how magical it is and how important it is and why we should be thinking about protecting these places,
Yeah,
right?
is a big mission of this to study animals and protect them? I mean, are you sending this to like nonprofits or something to see how they can help, or is this for the dome? What's the greater mission for this?
The greater mission is awareness around climate impact and conservation. So I actually run my own not-for-profit called Community Environmental Listening, where we go out and run workshops in the community, usually at local libraries, at any organization really, and help train people some very simple listening skills called passive listening, active listening, and directed listening. And we train them in how to do those practices so that they can go out and just regularly, whenever they feel like they have a couple of minutes to sit down, listen to their environment. And what that does is it reconnects us with the environments we live in, right? Which normally we're just like rushing through and too busy to engage with. And it helps us notice change. So the things that we really need to do to fight climate impact are to re-engage in our communities, like to listen to the planet, to listen to the world we live in.
Could you describe those listening
I
types?
can, yeah. Okay, so you can go to environmental-listening.org and have a look at this and read parts of the handbook that we have and so on. But I'll just describe them for you briefly here. So in all of these practices, what we're doing is we're addressing 100% of our attention towards listening, right? We're not doing anything else. And so it's often useful to close your eyes to do that as well. And so in passive listening, we are listening to the entire environment as a singularity. We're not allowing our attention to be drawn to a particular sound. So if you're outside, you might hear a car or a skateboard or a bird or something. We're not allowing our attention to be drawn to those things. We're just hearing the whole soundscape as a singularity. And so you can imagine putting your awareness at the center of your head and just allowing it to radiate out and absorb all the sound that's all around you without it being distracted to any particular element. So what that tells us is it tells us something about the health of the environment, the kind of use of the environment, the quality of energy in that environment, essentially, right?
Yeah, I feel calmer already. I was following along with you.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, everybody, when they come to these workshops, they always say, oh, wow, I feel so much more grounded and calm. And one of the things I love about it is it's really easy to do. It's free. You can do it anywhere. Anybody can do it, and so on. So the next one would be directed listening. And in this case, you would pick a single sound in your environment and you would become aware that you can take your listening and put it out at the sounding source. So let's say it's a bird up in a tree, right? And then you can really interrogate that sound. So the more intensely you address your attention towards listening to it, the more detail you're going to hear, right? So if you're sitting in your studio there's probably a computer fan or something. And if you address 100% of your attention at that computer fan and you listen to it intensely, you're going to hear deeper and deeper qualities of the sound. You're going to hear the edge of the sound, the way it cuts through the air, the kind of harmonics that vary with its speed. You're going to learn a lot about that sound, right? And
Yeah.
it could be any sound. And so those are the first two, and then we put those together, and you'll notice that the second one is kind of the opposite of the first one. And then we put those together in what we call active listening, which is to start listening to all of the sounds in the environment and listening to what are the relationships between them. So one bird might be talking to another, a plane might fly over and you might hear it reverberate off the buildings, for instance, because all of the built structures are an active part of our acoustic environment. Maybe you're sitting somewhere where there's a lot of trees and the trees absorb a lot of sound, so you hear some bass frequencies of the road, but not so much of the high frequencies, and so on and so forth. So you start just really interrogating what are the qualities of the total environment and how are all of those sounds interacting to make up what we call the acoustic ecology of the place that you're actually occupying at that moment.
Can you talk more about these domes that you said earlier, where you're bringing these sounds that you record out in the forest to people in the city? I feel like that could be really important to a lot of people these days.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there are so many ways to think about that. So in all of my work, I try to think about there being a level of community engagement. So we work a lot, for instance, in Costa Rica and also in Ecuador, with communities who make recordings for us as well. And they make them, like, particularly in Ecuador, but also in Costa Rica, they make them from like their historical knowledge of the land and where the animals might be and how that changes with seasons and so on. So community, and then there's an aspect of research. So in this case with the dome, we're really using that to think about the qualities of these environments and how we can share that, how we can analyze the spatiality of them, but also building up the kind of archive, if you like, right? So these sounds are changing over time. And so if we listen in that dome to parts of Joshua Tree 10 years ago, they sound different to what they listen to now. So we're kind of building up a library, if you like, of the acoustic properties of these environments over time. And then in all of my research, there's also community engagement and a creative side. The fact that we're using them for collective, relaxation sessions, but we also use those sounds to compose, to make art, to make kind of creative expressions that give people another reason to come along and engage and think more broadly about, how they can have power and do have power to act on climate change and contribute to the community and have more of a sense of kind of ecosystem as a community, right?
Yeah, let's switch to the music side of things. A lot of your work is in music, and you said previously that you just like throw a lot of the classical ways of thinking out the window. So, how is it that you make music? Is there any rule book, or is it just purely practice on knowing how to shape these sounds?
So all of my music would be based around thinking about sound and thinking about sound as energy. So thinking about what's its density, what's its texture, how does it move, what's its acceleration, making gestures, kind of ways that the layers stretch apart. And that doesn't matter whether I'm making something that's purely electronic or, for instance, a piece that I wrote a couple of years ago for orchestra. I'm still thinking the same way, right? I'm thinking really about whatever the source of the sound is, it's creating energy in the space, and that energy has properties and that changes over time. And so I would call the transitions over time, I call that dynamic morphology. And so you can imagine it kind of stretches out in different ways and changes its texture and so on. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't melodies in there. There can be melodies in there as part of those trajectories of change, but it's not my principal way of thinking about it. And there can be beats in there, believe it or not, right? I mean, it can be that energy has rhythmic pulses to it, and that's part of the quality of the sound, that it's pulsating in various ways, right? But I'm not thinking about the rhythm as a rhythm, like that it's, got a, I don't know, a kick on every beat or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah,
I'm
I was
not
thinking
thinking
about
about that
that.
kind of stuff at all, right? Um, and And then generally when I'm composing, it doesn't matter, as I say, whether it's with an acoustic instrument. For instance, I've written two movements of a chamber cello concerto, which use small ensemble and cello solo and electronics. And we've performed the first and third movement, and this year I have to write the second movement. So we've got the whole piece. So I'm always thinking about electronics as part of the total mix, because what electronics does for me anyway is it allows me to manipulate the sounds so that they really become fluid in some way, to stretch so they're no longer kind of necessarily perceivable as a note from the cello. And so I'm usually recording parts of the work as I'm developing it, and then creating kind of, if you like, sound design manipulations of those sounds that get folded back into the work. So you're never quite sure where the electronics begin and where the acoustics end, and that becomes a whole, like it kind of stretches the acoustics into a new domain.
Yeah, speaking of this electronic music, you seem like you've been making music for a long time, and nowadays with me and my friends who I started this show from, we're just making it on like these DAWs that are really easy to pick up, that people have picking up left and right, spending a week learning them, and then being able to make okay music. But how has it been transformed from when you first started, like how would you create that environment music without all these really easy tools, you know? It's kind of inconceivable to me.
Yeah, man. I mean, occasionally I say something about that in class, and everybody looks at me like I'm made out of stone, like I'm from the Stone Age, right? Um, in my lifetime, we've gone from not having any digital tools to work with at all to having, a plethora, too many, you might say, and being able to do everything in real time. Um, even even in my 20s, if I wanted to make a piece of sound that was manipulated in some way, let's say granulation, let's say I wanted to put a sound into a granular synthesis process, right, which you can do now in real time on your door, no problem. I would need to write some code in C Sound, which is a kind of scripting language for making music. And I would need to leave that sucker running all night to get like 20 seconds worth of sound out of it in the
Wow.
morning. And then, of course, I would listen to that and may be great. It may not be what I thought it was going to be, and I have to write the code and run it again for a day, right? So, and I remember, I mean, these are like ancient stories, but I mean, I was working as a sound engineer in Australia, back in the day when what's now kind of DigiDesign Pro Tools first came out, was called Sound Designer. And we were the first studio in Australia to have a stereo recording system, stereo, right? Just two channels, for mixing. And and we had to import a 600 megabyte hard drive from America, and it cost us like $3,500
Oh my
for a six
gosh.
megabyte hard drive. And that thing would sit there and shake every time it wrote something to the drive or read it back again. So
That's
it was
crazy.
crazy. So it's absolutely transformed, and I think that's wonderful. Like the tools that we have now, and tools that we're evolving are extraordinary, and you can do incredible things with them. I think it's also got some traps, and so one thing that I like to share when I'm mentoring younger composers and musicians is to not allow the tools to dictate what you do. So rather than sitting down at the door and starting to write the track using the door, which means in some ways you're being driven by what the software lets you do and how it lets you do it and so on, right? To not to not do that, but actually to sketch out before you even go to the computer ideas about what it is that you want to achieve, right? They could be drawings, they can be written bits of stuff, they can be whatever you want them to be. And then go to the computer and use it like a tool to make what's in your head. And if you do that, you'll find that you start making a different kind of music, and a kind of music that's really comes from your language rather than all of the effects that come from just working in a certain set of tools, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really big challenge for all of us. Like I use, probably similar tools to you. And then I also use a tool called Kima from Symbolic Sound. And Kima is used a lot, like in all the Star Wars movies and like loads of different movies. You'll hear all this sound effects and all of these kind of twisted musical effects and stuff that are all created in Kima, which is like a patching environment and a coding environment. So I use that a lot as well. But that's really like going to a space where you have a blank slate and you could do a trillion things there, right? It's not forcing you to do anything in particular. And so you really need to understand what it is that you want from that tool before you go and sit down and just start using it.
So when you start a piece, do you start with an environment or do you start with a thought of how something should sound? Or do you start with inspiration or things like that?
I always start with an idea about two things. One is, well, usually I'm starting from a kind of philosophical question in my head, right? And that might be more broadly like, how do I engage more people in thinking about the environment or in thinking about climate change or in just like being nice to each other or, whatever. But it's usually a bigger question. And then I'm thinking about how do I express that? And usually I will start to have some ideas about texture and the way the sound might change and density and so on. And then that leads me to feeling like I've got some sounds in my head, some and how they're transforming. And then that will lead me to start working, directly with a tool to start creating those sounds.
So, is the end piece an embodiment or an answer to that first philosophical question?
Oh, that's an excellent philosophical question. I'm not sure that there's ever an answer. So it's definitely embodiment because I think of all the pieces I make as experiences. And so you're in the piece, whether you're an audience member or the performer. And I think it's an exploration of the question rather than an answer. I don't think that my pieces, well, I don't think music has the power to state the answer, right? I think it has immense power to help us communally go on a journey of discovery. And so if we're thinking about that as exploring a philosophical question, then maybe we're more aware after that and we have a different sensibility. I think music does that really well. But sometimes I have to make my own tools for that. So for instance, a few years ago, I started a project with EarCam in Paris, and EarCam's like a big music research institute in Paris. And if you're interested in science and the arts, you should totally look up EarCam, which is ircam.fr. So I was there for 3 months working on a project, I was an artist in residence, so working on a commission project. And during that time, I was thinking a lot about nature. What is nature? How do we define nature? Why do we think of parks in the city as nature when they're all 100% human built and designed? And yet we go there and we're like, hey, we're in nature. Whereas really we're in a built garden, right? And I was like, where does that cross over? Where does the human impact disappear, and why do we have that sensibility? And I ended up making this like 45-minute kind of media opera with film and everything to explore that idea. But I really wanted the audience to be part of the ecosystem. I really wanted the work to create an ecosystem. So with the help of a team at EarCam, we actually developed a system where I play layers of the music in real time across everybody's cell phones. So everybody logs their cell phone into a closed network, and then I'm sending kind of granular synthesis processes and spatialization processes and samples and stuff out to everybody's cell phones. So rather than it just being a three-dimensional piece out on the loudspeakers, it's actually in your hand and everybody around you. And so the whole piece becomes about this question of what is an ecosystem, what is society, how do we bond together as community, like, turns the audience into an active participant in the creation of the work. And so it was a way of just thinking about how do I turn around this really ancient idea that we have an audience and you have the musicians on stage and they're playing and the audience can rock out to that and that's all fine, but in many respects they're kind of passive. They're receiving stuff and they're enjoying that maybe, but they're kind of passive in that. And it's like, how do we change that? How do we make that an active environment? How do we turn the whole piece into an ecosystem? That's the kind of things that I kind of end up doing, is kind of exploring those ideas and trying to push the tech and build new tech if it's necessary, and think about my composition within that framework. So the whole piece is really becomes an ecosystem.
That's really, I would love to answer some of those questions here, but this is actually the first time I've used Zoom for an interview, so I didn't buy
Okay.
the version and it's ending in 7 minutes. So hopefully we can
Right.
do another interview in 6 months or so. I'll send you an email, but
Sure.
before we leave, could you describe some of your future projects and just get people hyped for them? Just, give their pitch and what it means to people and why they should be interested.
Oh, sure. Sure. So currently I have 3 projects on the go. One is Been working with the Phoenix Zoo on automatic gunshot detection system that I developed to help protect jaguar and other animals in Costa Rica from poaching. And so we're in kind of phase 3 of that project. And we just added to that using machine learning systems on our network that we've put through the forest to identify endangered bird species that are there and to track how many are there and where they are and so on and so forth. So one thing I would say to your listeners who I'm sure are mostly musicians is that when you think about music more broadly as sound, and when you think about sound as the material you're working in, you don't need to only apply that in terms of making tracks and releasing albums. You can think about sound in the world in a whole range of different ways, right? Sound tells us more about the world than any other sense that we have. Like so much, it's incredible, right? So that's part of that project, and we continue to work on the species density stuff and really trying to raise awareness and go and check out environmental-listening.org, the community environmental listening project. Happy to run some classes for people on that, and just listen to your environment. Really makes a big impact. It chills you out, but it also really engages you with the place you live. It's super important for us to do that right now with all of the changes that are going on and all the political bullshit that's probably stressing out a bunch of people, right? You could just go outside and listen for 5 minutes. It'll transform your brain. It'll make you much more centered. The other piece that I'm working on is the second movement of that cello concerto. I'm super excited because I'm hoping by the end of the year to have recorded the whole piece. It's for solo cello and 2 bassoons and violin and a bunch of instruments and electronics. Super stoked about getting that finished. I hope that'll be well received. And then the other piece is the cell phone stuff. And so I've had some concerts here in Phoenix in Arizona last year. Or was it early this year? End of last year, with cello percussion and everybody's cell phones. I'm working on some new works actually that'll happen in this chamber music series, which is a classical music environment, but it'll be for classical instruments and wildlife recordings all over the world. So again, bringing that center stage. And I'm making a new piece for prepared piano and large-scale multi-channel diffusion and everybody's cell phones at ZKM in Germany in February. And I'm also super pumped about that. Everybody will be right in the middle of that piece as well.
Wow, that's a lot of projects. How do you manage your time? Calendars?
Yeah, calendars.
You travel around the world a lot, like from Australia to Costa Rica. Do you frequently take trips?
I actually only travel when it's, there's a work reason for it. So Costa Rica, because we've been implementing these poaching systems and working with the Phoenix Zoo and the National Park System. I'll be in Europe January, February next year. Next year to do this work at EarCam and this commission at ZKM. So I tend to only travel when I've got gigs that I'm doing in festivals or something, or when I've got other projects that require me to be there. But yeah, I do end up traveling quite a bit. I'm quite conscious about the carbon footprint of that, so that's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Sometimes I bring experiences and share stuff with people that I can't do that remotely, and so it's important to be there. And on the other hand, that creates an environmental impact that I'm conscious is not
Do you ever go on vacation with this much work?
Yeah. I'm actually I have a sailing boat, so that's my escape hatch.
Yeah.
I'm sitting on it right now.
You're on a sailing boat, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Could you turn off the background so that we see?
Yeah, give me a sec. Which backgrounds? Turn it off.
Wow.
There you go.
Did it turn the camera outside? Are you on the water right now? Are you in the middle of the ocean?
Sailing.
Sorry to disrupt your vacation.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Wow.
We'll go back to Arizona. There we go. Yeah, no, always happy to talk to people, and particular younger artists like yourself, and share some ideas. And you know, good for you. It's great that you're talking to people, and um, yeah,
Thank you. I'll
it's
send you
fantastic.
the article when it's completed. I'll get to editing right now, but we have less than a minute left. I'll be sure to
Alrighty,
upgrade next time. But have a
all
great
right,
day,
cool.
Mr. Garth Payne, and I urge everybody to go check out your next projects. Thank you.
All right, yeah, thanks. Ciao.
I ended it before he said ciao. Okay. I love that guy. Like and leave a comment who I should interview next. Leave a comment about what was your favorite part. And leave a comment on what types of interviews you want, what questions that you want answered about music or anything. Thank you. And part of this mission for this is to get answers to questions from the experts themselves. So if you have a question about astronomy that no one's answered, just comment it below. I'll find an expert and I can get all of your questions answered. Thank you.